Hey guys, tonight we're heading to the sun-drenched shores of 19th century Hawaii, where the waves roll soft and warm onto sand that squishes gently between your toes and occasionally into your sandals. The breeze smells faintly of plumeria, roasted taro, and, curiously, dog fur. Yes, you've arrived in a place where dogs don't just sleep under coconut trees and steal fish scraps from beach cookouts. They also have to pay taxes. Or rather, their owners do. Now, don't panic. You probably won't survive this economy anyway. I mean, can you imagine itemizing your pet on a tax form with a feather quill while a poi dog chews on your only sandal? This is paradise with paperwork. And yes, someone really had to write all those dog names down, one tail wagging rascal at a time. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to hear where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Let me know down in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive barefoot, as most do, stepping down from a carved canoe pulled onto the warm shore. The ocean murmurs, low and sleepy behind you, while birds dart across the late afternoon sky like flecks of moving sunlight. It's the mid-1800s in the Hawaiian Islands. The Kingdom of Hawaii is an independent monarchy. And everything feels slower here. Slower, but also changing. And look, dogs. A lot of them. Round-bellied, gentle-eyed, and with fur that's more fluff than function. They're sprawled across the village square, nosing around cooking fires, snoozing in doorways, or trotting after children who clearly aren't interested in owning a leash. These are the famed Ilio, the Hawaiian poi dogs. You squint at one particularly pudgy fellow attempting to steal a banana off a low table. He wobbles like a loaf of bread with legs. Dogs aren't just pets here. They're companions, sometimes guardians, sometimes food, sometimes symbols of status, and increasingly, they're becoming something else entirely, taxable. You follow a slow-moving procession into a quiet gathering space, a kind of open-air council hall made of timber and thatch. Inside, elders sit with great calm, listening to a much younger man read something off a bundle of papers with the type of voice that suggests he'd rather be anywhere else. His topic? Whether dogs, like pigs or woven mats, should be subject to taxes. You can tell this has been going on for a while. Someone in the corner is carving a turtle into a piece of driftwood. Someone else is asleep, very possibly snoring, but the issue is real. The Hawaiian kingdom has entered a phase of increased contact with the West. Foreign traders, missionaries, and even governments have begun to take notice of the island's strategic and cultural wealth. With that attention comes pressure to adopt formal economies, codified laws, and standardized taxation. Historians still argue whether this tax idea originated from royal advisors, foreign influence, or an accountant with an unfortunate allergy to dogs. What we do know is that by the 1840s, taxation had become more systematic, and dogs were increasingly seen not just as companions or cuisine, but as assets that could, and should, contribute to the state. You wander back outside. The sun is lower now, and the dogs are more active. Sensing dinner time approaching, one gnaws on a coconut husk. Another sits serenely like it invented meditation. You spot a child with a small bundle tucked in their arms, a puppy, barely old enough to open its eyes. The child's mother laughs, saying something about registering the new dog before the full moon. You blink. Registering? Yes, even in paradise, there's paperwork. The tax, at this early point, is more idea than enforcement. But you begin to hear rumors of record books, of families listing how many dogs they own, alongside pigs, chickens, and taro patches. You hear that some communities already assign a nominal value to each dog, not based on breed or size, but on ownership itself. 1 dog per household might be free. 2, fine. But 5? That's suspicious. Are you running a kennel? Or worse, hoarding dog wealth? Beneath the palm trees, with birds chirping overhead and surf crashing rhythmically, you start to feel it. This strange blend of tradition and transformation. The Hawaiian world is full of deep ties to nature, to rhythm, to gods that ride waves and live in volcanoes. But now, there's also ink. There are forms, and apparently, taxes for your furry friends. And the dogs? They don't care. Not even a little. They stretch their stubby legs. dig lazy holes, and dream, no doubt, of taro snacks and long naps. You follow the scent of wood smoke and roasted breadfruit as the soft morning air curls around you like a shawl. It's the kind of quiet only found just after sunrise, when the ocean hushes its nighttime rumbling and even the dogs seem to tiptoe around their yawns. You slip into the cool shade of a simple government hail, where a young man with a very serious face is already hard at work with his inkstone and bamboo stylus. He's one of the new clerks, part of the Hawaiian kingdom's expanding bureaucracy. And today, his task is delightfully absurd: to record the names and numbers of dogs in this particular district. The dog ledger, as it will later be called, is exactly as exciting as it sounds. And yet, you find yourself leaning over his shoulder with growing interest. 2 adults, 3 children, 1 pig, and, 2 dogs, he murmurs aloud, scribbling each line in practiced strokes. He pauses. Actually, 1 is a puppy. Still counts? He shrugs and keeps writing. This is no small task. The kingdom is now trying to apply more Western-style governance, which includes cataloging the population, not just of people but of animals too. And while pigs and taro are easy enough to track, dogs, well, dogs move. They switch households. They have no collars, no tags, and no particular interest in being counted. One woman insists she has only 2, while behind her, 5 tails wag in chorus like a very fluffy chorus line. Still, the clerks persist. They note not just numbers, but sometimes names. There's Kaana and Uliuli, Nui and Lani. One is just called Dog. Another, curiously, is named Governor, and you suspect that's a subtle protest of some kind. The ledgers themselves are delicate, copied onto mulberry bark paper or imported ledger books from California. Their pages are smudged with fingers sticky from sugarcane and ink stained from days of humid writing. And yet, they tell a story. A kingdom slowly organizing itself. Villages turning into districts, households into tax units, and dogs into taxable entities. You wander into another house. This one larger, belonging to a lesser alii, a noble of modest rank. He welcomes the clerk with a nod and gestures toward a bamboo enclosure where 3 dogs snooze in a pile. One lifts its head, yawns with dramatic flair, and promptly goes back to sleep. They're not mine, the alii says, smiling. They follow the chickens. This is where things get murky. Ownership. What does it even mean here? In traditional Hawaiian culture, animals aren't always owned in the Western sense. A dog might live with your family. Yes, but it also wanders the village, accepts food from your neighbor, and chases fish with your cousin. Is it yours, or is it part of the communal fabric? Historians still argue whether these early dog records truly reflect ownership or simply presence. The lines blur. Some dogs are clearly pets, named and loved. Others are semi-wild, tolerated but not quite tamed. Still others serve specific roles: guardians, hunting aids, or even ceremonial companions. And then there are the lapdogs, imported from Europe, with names like Buttons and Sir Fluffington. Yes, seriously. Back at the ledger table, the clerk lets out a soft sigh as his ink smears across a column. A dog has jumped on his scroll. Again, the dog looks entirely unrepentant. The dog ledger project is not perfect. Many entries are guessed. Some households get counted twice, others not at all. There are suspicious patterns. Certain districts report exactly the same number of dogs every year, which feels about as believable as saying your socks never go missing. And yet, this act of counting transforms things. Slowly, the idea grows that dogs can be tracked, that they can be listed, and by being listed, taxed. You begin to see whispers of policy taking form. Maybe households with more than 5 dogs should pay an extra tribute. Maybe dogs used for trade need a special mark. Maybe, just maybe, that puppy hiding in the sugarcane is not just cute, but potentially lucrative for the royal coffers. You pass a man carving a stylized dog into a wooden gatepost. He tells you it's to honor his family's dog spirit, a guardian. A good omen. You nod, watching as another real dog pees on the gatepost immediately afterward. That's sacred irony for you. Out near the shoreline, you spot a cluster of children playing tag with a trio of poi dogs. They're not particularly fast dogs, more loath than lightning, but they try their best. You laugh softly, remembering the clerk's smudged pages and his sighs. How do you tax something so joyfully chaotic? But the kingdom keeps trying. In ledgers and meetings, through ink and stamps, the process marches forward, clumsy but determined. You keep walking, the distant bark of dogs trailing behind you like the start of a lullaby that never quite ends. You pass a breadfruit tree just as a ripe one thuds gently onto the grass, startling a nearby poi dog into a sleepy growl. Its stubby legs twitch as it readjusts its belly to a more comfortable sunbeam. You pause to observe its soft ears, its round frame, and that signature contentedness that only a dog who's never heard the word vet can truly master. This, you realize, is no ordinary mutt. It's a bona fide Hawaiian poi dog, Ilio Makue, to be precise. Not just a creature, but a cultural legacy. The poi dog isn't really bred for anything except being there. Some people call them spiritual guardians. Others describe them as warm food bowls with legs. Their name comes from their primary diet, poi, the fermented paste made from mashed taro root. And yes, that's what gives them their unmistakably soft, round bodies. You try not to compare them to slightly overfilled beanbags, but the resemblance is hard to ignore. You spot a woman gently placing a flower lei around her dog's neck. He likes purple, she says, doesn't mind yellow, hates red. You nod as if color theory matters in dog fashion. These poi dogs aren't bred for hunting or herding. In fact, most of them wouldn't survive a proper fetch. They're gentle, calm, and oddly stoic, with flat heads and soft jaws. One theory goes that their flat skulls came from the soft poi diet over generations, though historians still argue whether that's biologically accurate or just a colonial-era misunderstanding. They were everywhere, from high-ranking Ali'i households to village fire pits. Poi dogs wandered, snoozed, and occasionally sat in council meetings like they had an opinion. You begin to notice how their presence shifts depending on geography. In upland taro communities, dogs are plumper, friendlier. Along the coasts, they're leaner, quicker, perhaps a bit saltier in personality. Dogs in Hawaii weren't just pets. They had roles, sometimes sacred. Some were guardians, others were sacrificial companions in certain rituals, or symbols of status among the elite. And then, of course, there was the culinary use, a reality that might seem uncomfortable now, but in pre-contact Hawaii, wasn't unusual. Dog meat was reserved mostly for chiefs and ceremonial occasions. It wasn't everyday fare, more like the royal dessert of the protein world. You hear one old man mutter under his breath, "In my father's time, you'd be honored to have dogs served at a feast. Now you pay a fine if it even barks." He chuckles. His poi dog sneezes violently and then tries to eat a leaf. There's a carved figurine at a nearby temple platform, heiau, depicting a dog seated proudly beside a warrior. Some oral traditions say dogs accompanied men into battle or were kept as protective spirits near birth huts. Others claim they were reincarnated ancestors, sent to keep an eye, or a wag, on descendants. You try not to laugh at the idea of your granduncle reborn as a dog who can't quite catch lizards but tries very hard. Still, over time, the poi dog's role begins to shift. As Western influences deepen, new dog breeds arrive, leaner, louder, more athletic. Missionaries bring their own companions. Traders import dogs for hunting and protection. And the poi dog, round and mild-mannered, begins to seem outdated, outpaced. There's something tragic in it. The slow eclipse of a native species not through violence, but through quiet obsolescence. No one outlaws the poi dog, but fewer breed them, fewer care for them in the traditional way. And gradually, they fade. By the early 20th century, they've vanished entirely, not with a bang, but a nap. You sit beside a small fire pit where an elderly woman roasts banana. A poi dog snores softly under her chair, paws twitching. "He's not a real poi dog," she says, "but close enough." You nod. The dog seems content with the compliment. Every now and then, modern scientists try to reimagine what the poi dog might have been, using old skulls, oral histories, and early sketches by European explorers. But no one's entirely sure. Even the breed's temperament is debated. Some say they were gentle and loyal. Others, aloof and oddly stubborn. You suspect the answer depends on how recently they were fed. Back in the village, a group of children is building a fort out of palm fronds. One of the kids insists it's a castle and that his dog is the royal guard. The dog, for the record, is napping. A coconut bounces off its back. It doesn't wake up. You smile. Whether spiritual guardian, ceremonial companion, or just a rotund snuggler of small children, the poi dog was undeniably Hawaiian. And now, part of the long list of things being counted, taxed, and debated by a kingdom in transition. The tax forms may never capture their true worth, but someone, somewhere, still remembers that dog who wouldn't chase sticks but always showed up for dinner, and who, despite being taxed, never seemed to mind. You cross a dusty footpath lined with plumeria trees as the day begins to stretch and yawn. The scent is sweet, slow, like the start of a lullaby. In the distance, you hear the low clatter of wooden drums. But it's not a celebration, it's a legislative session. And yes, they're talking about dogs again. The council hall is crowded today. Chiefs and advisors, land agents and law scribes. Everyone's wearing that polite but slightly bored expression that says, "We're here because it's important, not because it's interesting." You slip in near the back and listen as the debate begins. Should dogs be taxed officially? If so, how? Flat rate? By weight? Per bark? Okay, not per bark. But that idea does get an appreciative chuckle. One scribe stands and argues that pigs are taxed. And pigs provide food. Dogs, on the other hand, mostly nap and steal breadfruit. So logically, if a pig is worth 3 leaves of kappa cloth in tax, maybe a dog is worth 1. But then a woman, one of the few commoner representatives, raises her hand. A dog is not a pig. She says, a pig doesn't follow you for 5 years. A pig doesn't guard your child from wild cats. A pig doesn't know how to sit. A nearby pig grunts as if offended. And so the conversation spirals, slowly, meanderingly, through metaphors and similes and several mentions of dog behavior that may or may not have been witnessed during eclipses. One advisor proposes a compromise: tax the dogs. But not all of them. Maybe just the ones above a certain age, or weight, or with luxurious fur. Someone suggests taxing only dogs that wear fancy collars. Another suggests taxing only dogs that don't wear collars, since clearly they're trying to fly under the radar. It's not going well. A small group of scribes has drawn up a chart that ranks dogs by utility. Hunting dogs at the top, followed by guard dogs, then ceremonial dogs, and finally, the general companion dog. One man has added a doodle of a sleepy poi dog at the bottom with the label, "Mostly Vibes." Historians still argue whether this was ever meant to become law or if it was just a particularly ambitious naptime distraction. Either way, the ranking never passes. You begin to notice that the real issue isn't the dogs at all. It's about what they represent. Ownership, status, Western concepts of property. Hawaiians traditionally lived in a more communal system, where land and even animals were often shared across family and village lines. But now, under increasing foreign influence, that's changing. Laws are being written, boundaries drawn. Dogs, like everything else, are becoming points of negotiation between old ways and new systems. At the edge of the hall, 2 tax collectors whisper. One of them holds a crude list: names, villages, livestock numbers. Next to each name is a column marked dogs, and in pencil. Beside several names, the word disputed. You ask about that. Some say the dogs aren't theirs. The older tax collector explains. They say the dogs belong to the land, or to the gods, or that they just followed them home. You nod. That feels accurate. Later that week, a royal proclamation is issued. It's vague, as most proclamations are. Dogs are recognized as taxable in principle, but no rates are set. Instead, a gentle suggestion is made. Register your dogs with your district clerk, just as you do your pigs and taro plots. It's framed more like a helpful reminder than a demand, but you can already feel the wheels turning. Back in your borrowed hut, a neighbor stops by to ask how many dogs you have. 2.5. You reply. One's old and mostly sleeps. The other is just a puppy. The half is a dog that visits on Tuesdays. Your neighbor nods solemnly and writes it down in a shell-covered notebook. You wonder what that will do to your taxes. Meanwhile, the dogs remain blissfully unaware. One trots by carrying a coconut husk the size of its head. Another is trying, and failing, to climb a rock. A third is lying belly up, tongue lolling, legs twitching in a dream that almost certainly involves poi. You smile. Taxable or not, They've already claimed the land. The days grow longer. The debates quieter. But the paperwork continues, slow, methodical, and just a little smudged with dried mango. The taxman, you learn, doesn't walk fast in this climate. He strolls, sometimes with a feather fan, sometimes with a dog in tow that isn't technically his, but who follows him anyway. Like a very furry intern. You trail behind one such tax collector as he zigzags between thatched homes and taro patches, checking off names from a scroll that's fraying at the edges. 2 dogs. He reads aloud, squinting at one entry, but Kaipo says 3. He scratches his head and adds a question mark beside the number. You peek into Kaipo's yard. One dog is dozing in the sun, another is chewing on a sandal, and a third, very small, very scruffy, is barking at a pile of leaves. You count again. Yep, 3. But Kaipo insists that the little one isn't his. She just visits, he says. Besides, she's more of a cat. This is not an isolated problem. As the dog tax becomes more real, especially in certain districts where enforcement is tighter, people begin to get creative. You hear about one man who tries to pass his dog off as a deformed pig. Another family swears that their 3 dogs are actually siblings from a legendary litter and must be taxed as a unit. 1 soul, 3 bodies, the mother explains, smiling sweetly. And then there's the case of Kimo, a fisherman who claims he only owns 1 dog, but rotates collars between 3 to avoid the higher tax. You watch as he expertly slips the same coconut fiber collar onto a different dog each morning like it's part of a very low-stakes magic trick. Historians still argue whether these early dog taxes were truly enforced evenly, or whether most officials simply gave up after the 3rd barking denial. At the district office, a growing pile of ambiguous declarations makes things more complicated. Some people list their dogs by name: Lono, the fat one; Pua, who doesn't bite. Others try to inflate the value of their dog for prestige, while simultaneously claiming it's too old to be taxed. It becomes a kind of game, a sleepy contest in passive resistance, waged with tail wags and technicalities. One official proposes a new solution: collars with stamped registration numbers. That way, they reason, each dog can be identified at a glance. A small fee will be charged for the collar, which, of course, counts as the tax. Cue the next round of gentle chaos. At first, people try coconut fiber collars, shell-studded designs. Some even carve tiny bone tags with names etched in. But it doesn't take long for counterfeit collars to appear. One village is rumored to have made a single wooden mold and started stamping identical numbers on every dog. Another is caught reusing collars from dogs that have mysteriously gone visiting forever. You sit beside a young boy who proudly shows off his dog's tag. It's just a dried kukui nut with a number scratched on it. Official, he whispers. You don't ask what number it is. It seems to change depending on the angle. All this effort might seem silly, but the tax money, at least in theory, goes to infrastructure, roads, schools, public wells. Some alii believe taxing dogs is symbolic, a demonstration that even casual comforts must contribute to the greater good. Others quietly grumble that dogs are the last thing anyone should be counting, especially when some families still don't have proper roofing. Meanwhile, the dogs, well, they just keep being dogs. They nap on warm rocks. They dig holes with deep philosophical purpose. They bark at passing crabs like ancient warriors calling for battle. They are, as they have always been, absolutely uninterested in the idea of taxation. One night, near the edge of a forest, you hear a rustle, then 2 glowing eyes, then 4, a pack of semi-wild dogs trotting silently across the moonlit field. They don't wear collars. They don't have tags. They belong to no one and yet to the entire land. You feel something stir, a sense of freedom. Untaxable, unlisted, utterly themselves. Back in the village, the tax collector files his final scroll of the week with a sigh. The ink has run. One entry simply reads, "Dog? Maybe. We'll see next year." And you? You're starting to understand that this sleepy saga isn't just about fur and fines. It's about identity, community, the space between what we own and what we live with, between structure and spirit, between nap and nuisance. Somewhere, a dog barks at nothing. Someone shouts half-heartedly, and the stars begin to blink awake. A rooster calls out into the hazy dawn. followed by a somewhat less coordinated howl from a dog that clearly isn't a morning person. You stretch, barefoot in the dew-wet grass, and begin wandering down a path that's beginning to look a little more familiar now. Houses with windows framed by imported glass. Picket fences creeping up like curious vines. And dogs, well, dogs that don't look quite like they used to. The poi dog is still around in some villages. But something has changed. These new dogs bark sharper. They walk with a certain alertness. They're longer, sleeker, and honestly, a little judgy. These are Western breeds, terriers, spaniels, hounds, brought over by sailors, missionaries, and merchants. And with them comes a new idea, dogs with purpose. You pause to observe one such canine, part hunting dog, part diplomatic ambassador, tethered outside a church. It's wearing a collar with an actual brass buckle. You can't help but wonder what its thoughts are on taxes. The 19th century Hawaiian kingdom is in transition, not just culturally or politically, but in daily life. You see it everywhere. In the schools built with missionary funds. The printed newspapers in both Hawaiian and English. And yes, even in the way people talk about dogs. The Western idea of ownership is becoming more entrenched. Dogs are no longer simply companions or semi-feral cohabitants. They're becoming property. Named, leashed, expected to behave, expected to belong to someone in a legal sense. This shift has major implications for the humble dog tax. Suddenly, it's not just a curious entry on a pig parallel tax form. It's part of a broader narrative, defining who owns what, and how society recognizes that ownership. You watch as a missionary couple leads a pair of small, perfectly brushed lapdogs through the village, attracting both admiration and a bit of eye-rolling. The local kids giggle as one of the dogs refuses to walk through a puddle. A poi dog nearby steps directly into a mud patch, then sits in it with proud resignation. One elderly alii shakes his head and mutters, "Even the dogs have gone foreign." Historians still argue whether this shift in dog culture was deliberate policy or a side effect of modernization. Either way, the presence of Western dogs, and Western-style attitudes about them, accelerates the decline of traditional canine norms. Dogs are more likely to be fenced, less likely to wander, and more likely to come with names like Victoria or George instead of Liko or Manoa. You visit a town square where a newly arrived British administrator is explaining to a translator that all dogs must be tagged before the next census. The translator repeats this in Hawaiian, with a slight smirk. You suspect his version might be more poetic. The administrator holds up a tiny metal tag. "This is for official dogs only," he declares, as if announcing the invention of toast. One nearby boy immediately asks if his dog, who only listens when bribed with banana, qualifies as official. It gets murkier from there. Some districts take this very seriously. They start documenting dogs with ink-stamped books. There's talk of creating a registry, something not unlike the doggy DMV. Meanwhile, the more rural areas continue to list dogs as small, brown, or the one that sleeps near the canoe. You begin to feel this tension between the island's relaxed, shared past and its increasingly boxed-up future. The dogs, bless them, don't seem to mind. But the people do. Some embrace the changes. Others quietly rebel. One man ties a coconut shell around his dog's neck with a tag reading, "No TAX." You laugh. The dog promptly eats the shell. Out on a grassy knoll, two dogs, a poi dog and a terrier, meet for the first time. They sniff, circle. The poi dog flops over in surrender. The terrier sniffs again, unimpressed, and sits on a rock like it's claiming land rights. That evening, you rest under the stars beside a family who still feeds their poi dog from the same wooden bowl they used 30 years ago. "He's not fancy," the grandmother says, stroking his fur, "but he listens to dreams. And in a world that's changing fast, maybe that's the most useful thing a dog can do." The breeze rolls in from the ocean, cool and a little smug, like it knows something you don't. You follow it into a shaded grove near the mission school, where a small group of elders sits in a slow circle, talking story. Their voices drift like smoke, soft, layered, occasionally punctuated by the sound of a dog snoring nearby. You settle beside a crooked palm and listen. The topic? Not dogs exactly, but morality, which, in this corner of the world, now somehow includes how many dogs you have, how often you feed them, And, most critically, whether they distract you from your spiritual obligations. Enter the missionaries. They've been here for a couple of decades now, bringing with them not just new languages and books, but whole suitcases full of opinion. And among those opinions is the growing belief that dogs, particularly too many dogs, are a sign of poor discipline, idle behavior, and possibly even backsliding into heathen ways. You'd think the dogs were running a secret anti-sermon society the way some preachers talk about them. One pastor preaches against excessive animal attachment, claiming that the people are treating their dogs like family, which, to be fair, they are. Another sermon claims that dog ownership encourages sloth, too much time spent scratching bellies, not enough time reading psalms. You raise an eyebrow. The dog beside you rolls over mid-snore and releases a sigh so long it could be part of the liturgy. Still, the moral debate grows. Pamphlets appear. School lectures are given. One widely circulated essay titled, "The Proper Christian Household and Its Limits on Canine Distractions," suggests families own no more than one dog. Preferably small, quiet, and, without tribal ornamentation. You glance at a local dog sporting a flower lei and a braided feather anklet. Definitely over the limit. Not everyone agrees, of course. One Hawaiian scholar, educated at the seminary, writes a rebuttal arguing that dogs have always played a sacred role in Hawaiian culture, guardian spirits, protectors, companions. He gently suggests that perhaps the problem isn't the dogs, but the need to control what joy looks like. Historians still argue whether this wave of moral scrutiny was about religion, power, or simply cultural confusion, but what's clear is that dog ownership, once casual, communal, and often joyful, is becoming more scrutinized. Not just through taxes, but through tone. You visit a small home where a mother is teaching her daughter to weave bark cloth. A poi dog lounges in the doorway, half listening. "We used to name our dogs after stars," the mother says. "Now they ask us to use Christian names. So this one is Peter. But sometimes I call him Hoku when no one's around." You grin. Peter Hoku opens one eye, unimpressed. At the schoolhouse, one teacher posts a new sign: "Dogs must remain outside during lessons." A younger child frowns and points out that his dog can't read the sign. "Then you must teach him," the teacher replies, without irony. And still, the dogs endure. One sneaks into a hymn circle and howls dramatically during the quiet bits. Another steals a Bible left unattended and chews it open to the Book of Psalms. Perhaps divine intervention, the owner says, or just poor taste in literature. Some missionaries soften their stance over time. A few even adopt local dogs, come to appreciate their temperament, their odd affection, their insistence on napping in doorways. But the broader shift continues, an unspoken sense that proper households now own proper dogs. In proper numbers, and preferably with names that don't sound like thunder gods. You sigh, watching the sun dip lower. It's hard to say when the judgment began, or if it ever truly ends. But for now, you rest your hand on the back of a warm, dozing dog and remind yourself that morality may shift, but love for a sleepy companion, well, that stays steady. You shuffle down a narrow footpath bordered by thick tea leaves and whispering sugarcane, following the smoky aroma of an outdoor cookfire. The sun is mellow now, edging toward that dreamy golden hour, when even the dogs seem to blink slower. Up ahead, a group of villagers gathers around a low stone oven, or IMU, carefully unwrapping layers of steamed banana leaves. The subject, today, is delicate, uncomfortable by modern standards, but part of the long arc of canine history in Hawaii, dogs. Not just as pets or guardians, but as food. Now before your brain races ahead, let's slow the pace. In pre-contact Hawaii, dog meat was not everyday fare. It was rare, ceremonial, and often reserved for the elite, or chiefly class. Eating dog wasn't taboo, it was a privilege, a sign of honor, the kind of thing you might experience once or twice in your life. Likely at a major feast or offering. The dogs chosen for this? Usually the poi dogs, raised on soft taro paste. They developed a tender meat and calm disposition. You're told they were treated well, fattened, sometimes sung too. The process was oddly reverent. There was respect in it. And, yes, sadness too. But things are changing. You overhear a conversation, half whispered, Half resigned, between two elders. Can't talk about it anymore. One mutters, "Not polite, not Christian." The other nods, "Used to be culture. Now it's a secret." Historians still argue whether the decline in dog as food practice was driven by Western morality, missionary pressure, or simple urbanization. Most likely, all three. What once was sacred becomes shameful. What once was ritual becomes rumor. At the local market, a sign hangs above the smoked fish stall, "No dogs." You're not sure whether that means they're not for sale or just not welcome as guests. Probably both. You ask an older woman selling taro about it. She sighs. It's not done anymore. People don't want to remember. But it happened, and it wasn't cruel, it was part of life. Even the word, ilio, meaning dog, begins to lose its deeper resonance in conversation. It becomes less a symbol and more a noun. And with that shift comes a change in how people talk about food, feasts, and family. You sit beneath a breadfruit tree beside a boy and his dog. The boy breaks off a piece of kalo pancake and shares it with his shaggy friend. "My tutu says dogs used to be food," he says, wide-eyed, "but not anymore." He says they're too smart now. The dog licks his fingers. In truth, no one really remembers the taste. And few want to. But the tension lingers, especially in quiet corners of the kingdom where traditions still echo. There's even a political edge to it. In the press, Western columnists and visiting diplomats occasionally mock the practice in print, using it as shorthand for uncivilized. Hawaiian writers push back. One essay in Ka He Hawaii accuses outsiders of moral hypocrisy, condemning dog eating while indulging in imported pork from plantations that treat animals worse. And then there's the confusion. A British trader once tried to import greyhounds to the island for racing. The dogs vanished within weeks. No one said what happened. But, well, you do the math. Still, even now, you hear stories, not of eating, but of memory, of feasts long past, of rituals with offerings that included dog meat wrapped in fragrant tea leaves and buried with song. Not cruelty, ceremony. Today, it's different. Dogs are companions. They wear collars. They bark during church. They beg for bits of fish skin and pretend not to understand when told to stay outside. And yet, beneath all that, you sense it. A complex legacy. Love, utility, reverence, and silence, all rolled into a single wagging tail. You stretch out in the grass, eyes half-lidded, as a gentle breeze carries the scent of roasted taro and sea salt. A dog pads over, curls beside you, and sighs into your side like a living pillow. No one taxes this moment. No one questions its value. It simply is. You wake to the rhythmic squeak of a reed pen scratching across parchment. Not fast, this isn't a hurried city, but steady. Persistent, like a dog scratching at the same spot on a mat for the 5th time in an hour. You peek into the small hut and see a young census taker hunched over a scroll nearly twice his height. He glances up. "Dog?" he asks. You shrug. "One just followed you in. Technically not yours. Welcome to the census." As the Hawaiian kingdom's government matures, the need to count its people, and their animals, becomes more important. It's not just about taxes anymore. It's about planning, governance, infrastructure, representation. And so, the census expands, line by line, name by name, including the ones that bark. You sit beside the clerk as he reads off entries: 3 pigs, 2 chickens, 4 taro patches, 1 canoe, 2 children, 1 ilio. He dips his pen in ink made from burnt kukui nuts and carefully copies each detail onto bark paper stretched flat with polished coral stones. Some households list their dogs proudly, names included. Others, not so much. In the coastal village you visit next, a man insists he owns no dogs. None. 0. Behind him, 3 dogs are actively digging a hole in his yard. They're wild, he says. Just visiting. You make a note. The census clerk sighs and writes, ambiguous. And then there's the woman who insists her dog counts as 2 because it's very large and unusually wise. The clerk pauses, considers the dog, who is, in fact, enormous, and adds a small asterisk next to the entry. That feels fair. Historians still argue whether the dog listings in these census scrolls were ever accurate, or if they simply reflected whoever was awake that day to answer the door. Some dogs were double counted. Others were disguised as goats. One particularly clever dog seemed to belong to 3 households simultaneously and received food from all of them. You cross the island to visit a larger census center in a growing town. Here, census agents are trying to standardize data. They've created columns for type of dwelling, education level, and, yes, dog count. One draft form even includes checkboxes labeled guard dog, food dog, and pet only. You stare at it for a long time. Pet only feels a little sad, like it implies laziness. You ask a scribe if the dogs ever cause problems with the numbers. He looks up, ink smudged on his nose. They always move, he groans, and they never carry ID. Still, the records grow. Some scrolls stretch over 12 feet long. Names and symbols weave through them like gentle waves. The dogs are there too, usually listed last. Sometimes noted for color, bark frequency, or number of toes. Don't ask why. You don't get a clear answer. It's easy to forget how fragile these scrolls are. Many are copied by hand. Some stored in bamboo tubes. Others in clay pots. Some disappear entirely, washed away in a storm. Chewed by rats, or used to wrap smoked fish. And yet, enough survive to tell the story of dogs not just as footnotes, but as living threads in the island's social fabric. One evening, you walk with a census clerk back to his hail. He carries his scrolls like sacred bundles. It's not just numbers, he tells you. It's memory. You believe him, because later, when a child asks his grandmother how many dogs they've had, she doesn't pause to count collars. She sends him to the corner where an old scroll lies tucked in a woven basket. Together, they find the names, Pele, Ikaika, Momi, and a strange little entry. One dog with no name, but very good eyes. Outside, a dog barks in the distance. Inside, the scroll gently rolls closed, like a story waiting to be reread. The sun peeks through the woven slats of a government hail as you step inside, squinting against the glint of something metallic. On the table before you lies a small pile of, is that brass? Bronze? You lean closer. Tiny, stamped medallions, each one looped through a fiber cord or soft leather band. A pile of history's smallest ID cards, dog registration tags. This is the result of one of the kingdom's more ambitious ideas. If counting the dogs isn't enough, maybe it's time to tag them. Officially, uniformly, publicly. A proclamation went out across the islands earlier that season. The wording was grand, but the idea was simple. All dogs must be registered. Registered dogs must wear a collar. Collars must bear a tag. And the tag must carry a number tied to that year's registry. The proclamation also includes a surprising clause. Any untagged dog found roaming could be considered ownerless and potentially subject to removal. You look around. A few people nod in agreement. Others frown. One elderly man squints at the tag and mutters, "Looks like a fish scale with a number. I'd rather the dog barked its name." Historians still argue whether this policy was truly about public safety, or just another attempt at exerting control in a rapidly westernizing kingdom. After all, it wasn't just about knowing who had a dog. It was about turning dogs into property with receipts. You step outside and begin to see the changes. In towns, you start to notice dogs wearing collars, some made of polished wood, others wrapped in woven cloth. A few even sport imported leather. The tags swing like quiet bells when the dogs trot by. Children begin treating the collar like a badge of honor. One boy tells you proudly, "My dog is number 41 this year. That means we were early." Another scowls and says his dog is number 387. But only because our canoe tipped on the way to register. In more rural areas, the response is mixed. One man says he carved his own tag from driftwood and scratched a number in with a fishhook. Close enough. He shrugs. And, predictably, resistance blooms. Fake tags appear. Dogs with duplicate numbers. Entire villages that decide to register all dogs under a single family name to save on fees. In one case, a dog is found wearing a collar with a tag that reads, "I am paid up." Do not ask questions. The enforcement is patchy. Some districts send officials to double-check tags. Others rely on honesty or exhaustion. A few just give up altogether and write, "Collar status unknown," next to the dog's description. You pass by a woman carefully polishing her dog's brass tag. It shines in the sun. "He's number 7, she says. "Same as our lucky taro patch." We wear the same number. She shows you a matching pendant on her necklace. You smile. Bureaucracy and bonding, all in one go. In the capital, however, things grow more rigid. Reports start to emerge of dogs impounded for lack of tags. There are murmurs of enforcement fines. A few overzealous officials take things too far, storming through neighborhoods demanding to see paperwork for dogs. And yet, the dogs carry on. Some wear their tags with the indifference of a creature who knows nothing about taxes. Others chew them off within days. One particularly clever mutt learns to hide his tag in the bushes and put it back on only when near a tax clerk. Still, the tag law does something subtle. It changes how dogs are seen, not just by their owners, but by the community. Dogs with tags are assumed to be official, protected. Dogs without? Suspect. The line between companion and stray becomes bureaucratically visible. That's not necessarily good or bad, but it is different. One evening, you rest near a cliffside trail, watching the waves crash against black lava rock. A dog sits beside you, tag glinting faintly in the firelight. It's not the number that matters. You realize, it's the quiet admission of belonging, of being claimed, cared for. You reach down to scratch behind the dog's ears. The tag jingles once, then all is still. You hear barking before you even see the gate. Not the deep-throated guard dog kind, but something lighter, higher-pitched, almost dainty. A bit like a sneeze with ambition. Welcome to the royal estate. You step through a carved wooden archway into the well-groomed grounds of one of Hawaii's elite residences, where the gardens are trimmed with obsessive care. The fish ponds are clean enough to reflect the moon. And the dogs? Well, the dogs are not your village poi dogs. These are imported, shipped across oceans, carefully bred. One of them has a ribbon on its tail. Another has its own woven sleeping mat embroidered with what might be tiny flowers or possibly sea urchins. You squint. A poodle, the first you've seen on the islands, trots past with the confident air of someone who thinks they've invented walking. It's followed by a footman carrying what looks suspiciously like a silver water bowl. The shift is stark. In this world, dogs are fashion statements, accessories, symbols of sophistication. These lap dogs don't guard taro patches or sleep under canoes. They attend garden teas. They nap on chaise lounges. One of them, you're told, once posed for a portrait. You nod politely and try not to laugh. The elite class, always global in outlook, has embraced European aesthetics with selective enthusiasm. French china, English lace, and now, foreign dog breeds. It's not just about showing off, it's about signaling modernity, refinement, being on equal footing with Western royalty. But of course, it creates tension. You overhear a cook muttering about the pampered fluff creatures underfoot in the kitchen. That one doesn't even bark properly, she says. It just wheezes with intent. Meanwhile, out back, the estate's groundskeeper still keeps a poi dog. Quiet, loyal, scruffy, keeps the rats down, he tells you. Doesn't need a ribbon to do that. Historians still argue whether the embrace of imported breeds was purely aesthetic or part of a deeper attempt to align Hawaiian nobility with European ideals. Either way, the transformation was real and dramatic. Royal pets began receiving names in English and French. One dog was reportedly named Duchess Clove of the Coconut Court. You make no effort to verify that. And where royal attention flows, public imitation follows. In Honolulu, you notice more imported dogs, pugs, spaniels, even a few dachshunds trotting alongside well-dressed families. Pet shops begin offering grooming cones, imported collars, and even printed pamphlets with feeding suggestions that include meat broth and a good biscuit. Once daily. This is not poi dog territory anymore. You pass a young boy brushing his terrier's fur with a surprising intensity. She's going to meet the governor, he explains solemnly. You nod, suddenly unsure whether to curtsy. Still, not everyone is impressed. In the markets, people murmur about the changes. Some think it's harmless fun. Others feel it's yet another way the old ways are being replaced, not by force, but by fashion. One auntie watches a prancing spaniel strut by and mutters, "You think that one could survive a night in the hills?" Her poi dog, lying belly up in the dirt beside her, flaps one ear as if agreeing. And yet, the imported dogs aren't all snobs. You see them play with the local strays, bark at the same passing canoes, chase the same chickens, sometimes with more enthusiasm than skill. At night, under the same moon, they curl up the same way, nose to tail. With a sigh. Because in the end, whether royal or ragged, ribboned or not, a dog is still a dog. And some part of the kingdom still remembers that. A light drizzle taps the palm fronds overhead as you make your way along a dirt path that's half mud, half mystery. Up ahead, voices rise in that unmistakable tone of people arguing over something that matters, but only just. As you draw closer, you catch the words, 3 dogs? He only paid for 2. Ah, we've reached the tax evasion chapter. Everywhere there are taxes. There are loopholes. Even here, under the banyan trees and beside the lava rock walls of small Hawaiian villages. The instinct to avoid paying a few extra coconut fiber coins for one too many dogs is alive and well. You sit beside a weather-worn bench outside the district clerk's hail, where a row of villagers is gathered with varying numbers of dogs in tow. Some wear collars, some don't. One is inside a woven basket with air holes poked in it, looking surprisingly smug. The taxman looks exhausted. His scroll is wrinkled. His ink-stained fingers twitch slightly every time a new dog walks up, or appears, or vanishes just as quickly. Your neighbor says you have 4. He says to one man. The man shrugs. That was last week. One went to live with my cousin. And the other 2 behind your canoe? They just visit. They're not mine. The taxman closes his eyes, mutters something you don't catch, and writes, disputed, in the margin. Historians still argue whether this surge in dog tax dodging reflected resistance to colonial-style governance or just a very natural desire to save a little money. Likely both, but what's clear is that creative tactics bloomed like taro in the rainy season. Some people claimed their dogs had passed into the spirit world the moment taxes were due, only to have the same dogs mysteriously reappear a week later, wearing different collars. Others tried to disguise their dogs. One infamous case involved dyeing 3 dogs with charcoal paste to make them all look like the same one. It worked until the rain came. And then there was the family who carved driftwood figures of dogs, 4 of them, and lined them up in front of their house during inspections, insisting, they're sleeping, don't disturb them. You watch as a woman approaches the tax desk with a fat, fluffy dog in her arms. This one is exempt, she says firmly. He's a healer. She gestures vaguely at his eyes. He can see bad spirits. The dog yawns. The clerk blinks. Still taxable, he says, but writes it down with a question mark anyway. Some districts try to crack down. Tag audits, surprise visits, informal bark counts. One overly enthusiastic tax clerk tries following suspicious dogs home, only to be led in wide loops across the village by a coy dog with an excellent sense of mischief. You help deliver a letter from a district chief to a particularly stubborn village on a nearby island. The letter says, in no uncertain terms, that all dogs must be declared, tagged, and paid for. When you arrive, the villagers listen patiently. Then one elder stands and says, fine, we all share the same dog. His name is Chemo. He belongs to everyone and no one. You look around. A dozen dogs lounge nearby. None of them respond to Chemo. Still, the deeper reason behind this resistance isn't laziness. It's cultural. The very notion of taxing a creature that roams, that shares its affection freely, that belongs as much to the wind as to a household, feels off. Foreign, like trying to charge rent for the ocean. You sit with an old fisherman sharpening his hooks. His dog lies beside him, tail thumping softly. He's my friend, the man says, but he's not mine. You understand? You nod. You do. And in that moment, you realize that the dog tax wasn't just an economic policy. It was a quiet battle over belonging, control, and what it meant to live in a place where even friendship might someday come with paperwork. The marketplace hums with its usual slow buzz, fishmongers slapping their catch onto woven mats, children chasing each other around baskets of mangoes, a dog stealing a kalo root and being chased by exactly 3 indignant aunties. But today, tucked into the folds of gossip and garlic, you notice a stack of freshly printed pamphlets on a low table near the newsboard. The top one has a bold title, Too Many Tales, The Tyranny of the Dog Tax. You grin. The press has entered the chat. As printing presses expand across the Hawaiian kingdom in the mid to late 1800s, so too does the lively habit of saying what's on your mind in ink. Public opinion now rolls off the press weekly, sometimes daily, and increasingly, the humble dog tax becomes a punching bag, a metaphor, and occasionally, a punchline. You flip through the pamphlet. It's written in both Hawaiian and English, complete with a small cartoon of a tax collector being chased by a pack of very opinionated terriers. The satire isn't subtle, but then again, neither is the growing frustration. Another article in Ko Okoa recounts the story of a woman fined for failing to tag her dog, Milo, who allegedly spent most of his time sleeping in other people's homes. The paper's conclusion? If Milo cannot declare a permanent address, perhaps he should not be fined for his wandering spirit. You laugh out loud. Nearby, a dog lifts its head and huffs, as if offended on Milo's behalf. Satirical poems start to circulate. 2. One is titled, An Ode to Dog Number 52, lamenting how the poet's pet now requires more paperwork than his canoe. Another, written in mocking biblical tone, begins, and lo, the beast of 4 paws came forth, and he was taxed. Yea, even as the fish of the sea were not. You wander through Honolulu's printing district, where a group of editors debates whether to publish a serialized story featuring a heroic talking dog who leads a revolt against dog tag laws. One of them is concerned it's too political. The others are already working on Chapter 3. Historians still argue whether this press push made any real policy changes. But it unquestionably gave voice to the people, and to the dogs. At least symbolically. Some officials try to clap back. A counter-article titled, The Necessity of Order in the Kingdom's Canine Affairs, appears, stating that taxation ensures health, safety, and public accountability. It's long, polite, and utterly humorless. The next week, a rival publication prints it backward as a joke. Under the headline, Barkwards Thinking. What emerges is something new, pup politics. Local leaders are asked their stance on the tax during village debates. Petitioners gather signatures to protest registration fees. A group of schoolchildren stages a tiny protest in front of the district clerk's hail. Their signs reading things like, My dog, my freedom, and WHO let the tax out? You're there when a dog accidentally becomes famous. It's a scrappy mutt named Polani who runs through a council meeting with someone else's tag dangling from his collar. No one knows whose dog he is, or whose tag. He becomes a symbol, a dog of the people, a 4-legged folk hero. Soon, someone writes a song about Polani. You hear it hummed across town. Polani runs with no concern. The rules he simply won't discern. With borrowed tag and borrowed name. He's free, unbothered, and untamed. And you realize something. This whole thing isn't really about dogs. It's about people. It's about the lines drawn between order and absurdity. Between the need to organize and the desire to let things be. You lie on a woven mat beneath a sky turning slowly orange. A dog curled at your side. His tag slightly askew. You hum a verse of the song. Not quite in tune. The dog sighs. Let the printers print. Let the poets rhyme. The dogs, as always, will do exactly as they please. You wander through the morning mist toward a sleepy taro field. Dew soaking into your ankles. And something quieter soaking into your thoughts. Maybe it's nostalgia. Maybe it's just the soft hush of change, but today, you feel it more than ever. The poi dog is disappearing. Where once every village had a few, now it's rare to spot even one. The fat-bellied, mild-mannered dogs that once waddled through feasts, guarded doorways, and occasionally photobomb ceremonies are fading from daily life. In their place are the new imports, terriers, hounds, retrievers, leaner, louder, with sharper edges and less interest in sunbathing. You sit beside an elder weaving lahala mats. Her dog, a wiry mixed breed, chewing quietly on a sandal nearby. There used to be a dog, she says, without you asking. Flat-headed, soft eyes, smelled like cooked kalo. She smiles. We called him Ulu. Every house had an Ulu. You ask what happened. She shrugs. Breeding stopped. People wanted faster dogs. Dogs that barked louder. Dogs that chased goats instead of chickens. Historians still argue whether the poi dog's extinction was an accident of genetics or a deliberate cultural shift. Maybe both. The soft-jawed dogs, shaped by generations of poi and communal living, weren't built for Western expectations, obedience drills, hunting expeditions, or fancy garden parties. And slowly, As breeding mixed and customs change, the poi dogs simply slipped away. One 19th century naturalist tried to describe them: low to the ground, broad of skull, gentle in spirit, and exceedingly round in torso. You chuckle. That could describe half the retired fishermen you've met. In Honolulu, you visit an apothecary who claims to have a preserved skull of a poi dog. He shows it to you, broad, flat, unmistakably different. You can feel the softness in the bone. He says, not literally, of course, but in spirit. You spend an afternoon reading through an old natural history journal. An entry notes the disappearance of Ilio Makue with a tone of mild surprise, as if noting that a particular cloud formation had simply chosen not to return. You close the book gently. But not all memory fades with the dogs themselves. You find echoes. A mural painted on the side of a canoe hail, 3 poi dogs lounging under a full moon. A child's lullaby, once sung to both babies and puppies: sleep, soft ears, the tide will wait. A carved figurehead on a fishing canoe, worn smooth by decades of sea spray, still bearing the unmistakable round snout and tucked tail of the old breed. You visit a village where an elder insists her dog is a poi dog descendant. He's got the belly, she says, and the attitude. You watch him nap through a thunderstorm, unmoved by lightning or wind. He might be. In some corners of the kingdom, people still honor the old dogs quietly, not as relics, but as ancestors, symbols of a time when life moved differently, when ownership was fuzzy, and affection didn't need a collar. You hear a rumor about someone trying to bring the poi dog back: selective breeding, skull measurements, reconstructed diets of soft taro. You wonder if it's possible, or even right. Maybe the poi dog wasn't just a breed. Maybe it was a way of living. You sit beside a slow stream where a boy skips stones. His dog beside him. She doesn't fetch, he says proudly. She just watches. That's enough. You agree. The stream murmurs. The dog blinks slowly, and the memory of soft ears and lazy tails drifts forward. Not gone, just quieter. You find yourself walking one last path, dirt packed firm by generations of bare feet and padded paws. It winds along the ridge just above the shoreline, where the sea hums like a great content dog sleeping under a blanket of clouds. The wind here smells like old taro, salt, and something gentler: memory. This trail leads you to a small museum, more hut than hall, tucked into the curve of a hillside. Inside, the artifacts are modest: a faded bark paper ledger with a column labeled "Dogs", a rusted collar tag marked 1881, a sepia-toned photograph of a family sitting barefoot on their porch, a round poi dog snoring beneath them like a cushion with legs. There's even a children's drawing preserved under glass: 5 lumpy dogs with stick legs and enormous smiles. Scrawled underneath in shaky Hawaiian script: "My Leo is round and he loves taro." You stand quietly, hands behind your back, as if reverence has crept up without asking. The dog tax, for all its quirks and confusion, is long gone, repealed, replaced, or simply forgotten by modern bureaucracy. But its ripple effects linger, not just in old records, but in how dogs are still spoken of in some communities. You hear elders refer to the days of collars, or tell stories about the dog who paid taxes twice. You sit outside on a bench carved from driftwood, where someone has etched a name you don't recognize. A dog trots past, a modern mix, all ears and enthusiasm, and pauses to sniff your foot. No collar, no tag, just freedom. Historians still argue whether the dog tax helped build civic responsibility or simply annoyed everyone involved. But here's what's not debated: dogs were, and are, woven into the island's history. Not as side characters, but as companions, symbols, contradictions, wild and loyal, lazy and essential, lovable, even when chewed up a sandal or two. You retrace your steps through the village one last time. On a wall, someone's painted a timeline of Hawaiian history in the form of a long, looping lei. Among kings and treaties and storms, there's a bead labeled, "Dog tax begins," and another, later, "Dog tax ends." Dogs continue. You smile. Of course they do. On a nearby porch, an old man naps beside a dog so still it might be carved from stone. A child draws circles in the dust. Somewhere, someone is probably still debating whether dogs count as family or property. But in this moment, Beneath this sky, you know the answer. Now the tide has come in and out more times than you've counted. And the dogs, real, remembered, and imagined, have all found their place beside the fire. The air is thicker now, softer, more full of hushes than words. The world feels padded, like moss underfoot. Even the birds have lowered their volume. And the wind doesn't rattle, just brushes gently. As if tucking something in. You sit very still. The way you might when a dog finally rests its chin on your knee and sighs like the weight of the day is lifting. Not dropping. The kind of sigh that says, "We're good now." Let the history books keep debating. Let the census sheets crumble quietly into the roots of taro fields. The dogs will go on. Maybe they're still here, dozing in corners, scratching at stories not quite told. Not everything has to be named, tagged, or taxed to matter. So let your thoughts grow slower now, like ripples fading into still water. Let the caller chimes fade. Let the scent of old firewood and salt settle into your breath. You don't need to walk anywhere else tonight. The path has led you gently home. The story can wait. The dreaming has already begun. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.